Underneath the surface of polished smiles and curated social feeds, beneath the soft light of nostalgia and the glitter of eternal youth, there is a silence. It's the silence of a woman who never truly arrived. She grew older, but not deeper. Time passed through her skin, but never rooted in her soul. Her laughter still sounds like a schoolgirl's in the wrong room. Her eyes sparkle. Yes, but with a kind of hollow shine, like a house with no furniture. This is not a flaw in her design. It is not vanity, nor selfishness, nor weakness. It is something older than her, older than culture. It is the archetype that Carl Jung called the Puella Aeterna, the eternal girl. She is not rare. You may know her, you may love her, you may even be her. She walks through life like a dream that won't end, floating rather than planting roots. She radiates charm, magnetic and intoxicating until the air grows still, and you begin to see through the haze. The eternal girl is not defined by her age, but by her resistance to becoming whole. In a world that worships youth and punishes aging, she was given a throne, not a path. And now she's stuck in the palace. But this isn't a condemnation. This is a diagnosis. And it begins with one truth. She fears responsibility like a shadow fears the sun. Commitment, whether to a partner, a career, or her own evolution, feels like chains to her. Not because she is lazy or indifferent, but because she associates maturity with confinement. She sees adulthood as a kind of spiritual prison, a place where dreams go to die and souls go to sleep. So she dances, she escapes, she delays. Anything to keep from entering that dreaded space where decisions are final and fantasies fade. In her mind, freedom is everything. Spontaneity is her creed. But in her pursuit of freedom, she often becomes a prisoner of her own avoidance. There is a cost to living in endless postponement. She avoids depth in relationships because depth requires sacrifice. She resists permanence because permanence threatens to hold a mirror to her unfinished self. And so she drifts from one place to another, from one person to the next, always charming, always enchanting, but never quite arriving. She is the high priestess of youth. She idolizes the energy of beginnings, the butterflies, the rush, the fantasy. She clings to the symbols of adolescence long past their time, the flirtation, the rebellion, the drama of being misunderstood. But what happens when you stretch youth beyond its natural limit? It frays. It spoils. It begins to look like a costume rather than a second skin. And underneath that costume is not a villain, but someone deeply afraid of what comes next. Because beyond youth lies the unknown. And the eternal girl has no map for that terrain. Often, her relationship to beauty becomes a battlefield. Not because she is vain, but because in a society that worships appearance, beauty became her currency, her shield, her identity. Aging, then, is not just a biological fact, it is an existential threat. To age is to be erased, to be forgotten. And in that fear, the eternal girl may try to freeze time through fashion, through surgery, through filters both literal and emotional. But no matter how well she hides, time knocks, and the soul remembers the debt. What makes this more complex is her reliance on others to hold the parts of her she never developed. She may seek out powerful partners, mentors, or even friends to serve as her anchors while she floats just above the surface. She's not always conscious of this dynamic. To her, it may feel like trust, like love, like surrender. But often, it's a subtle dependency, a giving away of the adult within her to someone else in exchange for protection, for guidance, for direction. This isn't manipulation. It's survival. It's a coping mechanism forged in childhood, perhaps, when responsibility came too soon, or when she was never taught how to hold her own weight. So she learned to be delightful, to be wanted, to be light. Because being light meant being safe. But over time, what once kept her safe keeps her small. The eternal girl struggles to face herself in solitude. She avoids the stillness where uncomfortable truths live. She fills the silence with distractions, romance, fantasy, reinvention. Not because she is shallow, but because she never learned how to sit in the deep end without drowning. Emotional immaturity isn't about lacking feelings. It's about lacking the capacity to process them, to hold the contradiction, to stay with the discomfort long enough to grow through it. And that is what she must learn if she wants to wake up. But waking up is not as poetic as it sounds. It is not a gentle opening of the eyes in a sunlit room. It is a violent shattering of illusions. It is the death of fantasy and the painful birth of truth. For the eternal girl, this awakening is a betrayal of everything she thought kept her alive. Her stories, her identity, her charm, they must all be questioned, and this terrifies her. Because when you've built your world on dreams, reality feels like an earthquake. So she escapes, into fantasy, into endless becoming, into personas that offer temporary relief. She may become the seductress, the mystic, the rebel, the muse. Each role offers her a sense of meaning, a new beginning, a promise of wholeness without the work. But every escape route circles back to the same place, a hollow center. She is not lost because she is weak. She is lost because she is fragmented. And no role can hold all the pieces of her soul. The fantasy is not just about avoiding pain. It's also about avoiding the responsibility of authorship. If life is a dream, she doesn't have to write the ending. If love is always a fairy tale, she never has to endure the mundane. But love is not a fantasy. It is a furnace. It reveals everything we hide. And the eternal girl struggles with this. She may fall quickly, passionately, recklessly in love with the idea of love. But when the magic fades, when real intimacy begins, the kind that requires presence, accountability, depth, she retreats. Not because she doesn't care, but because she doesn't know how to stay. She idealizes others in the same way she idealizes herself. Romantic partners are either perfect or disappointing. There is no middle, no humanity, only projection. This pattern repeats itself, sometimes for years, and the more it happens, the more disillusioned she becomes. She may blame the world, the men, the timing, but at the core is a painful truth. She is searching for someone to complete her because she hasn't completed herself. And beneath this cycle lies a deeper wound, the belief that she is not enough without being adored. That love must be earned through performance, not presence. That vulnerability is dangerous, and power comes from being wanted, not known. So she seduces, but she rarely reveals. She connects, but rarely roots. She speaks of freedom, but longs to be held. These contradictions live inside her like ghosts pulling her in opposite directions. Eventually, this dissonance gives birth to something darker, a subtle victimhood. A sense that life is happening to her, not through her. She may feel misunderstood, unappreciated, unseen. And often, she is. But she also resists being fully seen because being seen means being real. And being real means letting go of the illusion. The victim mentality becomes a shield. It protects her from failure, from rejection, from the terrifying prospect that she is responsible for her own becoming. But Carl Jung did not name these archetypes to condemn us. He named them so we could recognize them and evolve beyond them. The Puella Aeterna is not a curse. It is a calling, a spiritual threshold, a sign that the girl must die so the woman can be born. Not the woman that society demands, but the woman that her soul remembers. To cross this threshold, she must enter the shadow. She must meet the parts of herself she has disowned, the rage, the fear, the grief, the hunger. She must feel it all, without running, without numbing, without turning it into performance. This is the crucible, the descent, and it is sacred. It is in the shadow that the eternal girl begins to see her true shape. Not the pretty mask, but the raw, sacred mess underneath. Not the fantasy, but the fire. This is the moment when she stops asking to be saved and starts becoming the one who saves herself. Not through perfection, but through integration, through wholeness, through the courage to walk into adulthood not as a burden, but as a birthright. And in that wholeness, something radical happens. She discovers that maturity is not the death of beauty. It is its deepening. That aging is not erasure, but revelation. That responsibility is not a trap, but a key. And that freedom is not the absence of boundaries, but the power to choose them with wisdom. The eternal girl, when she evolves, becomes a force of nature. She does not shed her youth, she weaves it into her maturity. She keeps her wonder, her creativity, her magic, but grounds it in strength, in truth, in purpose. She no longer runs from the mirror. She looks into it and sees not a fading girl, but a rising woman. This is not an easy path. It is not glamorous. It is not rewarded in likes or followers, but it is real, and it is necessary. Because the world does not need more fantasy. It needs women who have come home to themselves, who have walked through fire, who have learned to stay. And staying, truly staying, is the final rebellion. It is the choice to inhabit your life fully, not as a passenger, but as the driver. To stay in your body when it trembles, to stay in the room when the conversation cuts deep, to stay in your story when every part of you wants to rewrite it or run. The evolved, eternal girl becomes the woman who doesn't flinch at truth. She learns to hold complexity in her palms, joy and grief, youth and age, tenderness and power, all without letting any one of them define her. She no longer waits for someone to tell her who she is. She no longer auditions for love. She no longer trades her voice for safety, because she has learned that becoming a woman is not about losing anything, but about remembering everything. Everything that was buried under the need to be adorable, agreeable, desired. She excavates her soul from the ruins of performance, and she rises not as an ideal, but as an individual. She becomes the one who leads others out of illusion, not with sermons, but with presence. She walks into rooms not to be seen, but to see. She offers love not as bait, but as balm. Her presence is no longer decorative, it is directive. It says, "I have met myself. I am not afraid of your storm, because I have walked through mine." This woman understands now what Carl Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The eternal girl lived in the unconscious, floating, avoiding, dreaming. But the conscious woman steps onto the ground and listens. She digs into the roots of her desire, her fear, her story. And in that digging, she finds the seed of transformation. She doesn't kill the girl inside her, she teaches her how to grow. It is not the end of youth that marks this transformation. It is the end of illusion. Because true maturity is not sterile or dull, it is luminous with wisdom. It is the kind of beauty that can be captured in a photograph or sold in a bottle. It's the kind of beauty that silences a room, because it is real. And from that reality, she begins to create. Not just art, or love, or family, but space. Space for others to be fully human. Space for herself to evolve without shame. She becomes the woman who holds contradiction without collapsing, who mothers herself in the places her own mother couldn't reach, who no longer begs for permission to live. This is what happens when the eternal girl stops running from pain, from aging, from herself. She stops running and starts returning to her voice, to her body, to the lineage of women who came before her, some who never escaped the archetype, and others who cracked it open and walked through. She walks now with their voices in her bones, not to mimic them, but to remember. She was never meant to stay small. She was never meant to be a girl forever. She was meant to grow wild and wise, to be a mirror for other women still trapped in the dream, to be a lighthouse for the ones learning how to stay. And so, if you recognize her in yourself, this is not your shame, it is your invitation to stop floating, to stop performing, to stop pretending you are not powerful. You are. But power without roots is only noise. And you now are being called to quiet, to depth, to realness. You are being called to become not the version of yourself that pleases others, but the one that completes you. Because when the girl finally lays down her crown of illusion, something unthinkably beautiful happens. She doesn't disappear. She expands. She becomes the woman who can hold her own life in both hands. Not perfectly, but fully. And in a world that teaches women to vanish gracefully, there is nothing more radical than becoming whole.